In. The fire alarm wasn't the kind that gave you warning. 1 second the cafeteria at Meridian General was humming with the low Tuesday afternoon clatter of trays and gossip. And the next, there was a sound like the whole building had inhaled wrong. And then smoke was crawling out of the east stairwell in thick gray ropes that moved faster than people did. Maya staff stood up. A few started toward the doors. But the woman, wiping down table 9 in her gray housekeeping polo, didn't stand up slowly, and she didn't move toward the exit. She set the rag down, looked once at the smoke, and started counting. Doors. Patients. The 2 old men by the window who used canes. The mother with the stroller near the vending machines. Incidents. She counted the way a person counts, when counting is the only thing standing between order and a body bag. And nobody in that room understood yet that the quietest employee in the building had just become the most important person in it. Her name, according to her badge, was Della Okonkwo. And the badge said housekeeper in small block letters under a photo where she wasn't smiling. She'd worked at Meridian General for 7 months. In 7 months, almost nobody had learned her first name. In her, they called her the cleaning lady, or hey, or nothing at all. And that was fine with her, because being nothing at all was the entire point of coming to a town like Cedar Hollow, Ohio, where the biggest news of the year was a new traffic light on Route 9, and nobody ever asked you what you did before. Della arrived at Meridian. The morning Della arrived at Meridian, she'd carried 1 duffel bag and a folder of paperwork that listed her last job as facilities in Akmead, contract with a phone number that went to a real office that would confirm she was reliable, and say nothing else. The HR woman, Della Rifle, spoke. A tired and kind person named Pat, who ran the whole department out of a closet-sized office, had looked at the gap in her resume, almost 9 years of it, and started to ask his face and decided not to. None be why folk. People who'd been somewhere hard had a particular stillness. Pat had a brother who'd come back from Iraq with that same stillness, and she knew enough to leave it alone. "We're glad to have you," she said instead. And Della had said thank you, and that had been the whole interview. There was a man named Roy Tibbetts who'd run environmental services for 19 years and treated the job like a small kingdom. Roy wasn't cruel, exactly. He was worse than cruel in the slow grinding way that had no single moment you could point to. He just never let you forget your place. He just never let you forget your rooms. The isolation wing, the bathrooms, after a norovirus outbreak. The morgue floor at 2 a.m., Mr. spoke. And he'd watch her take them without complaint and somehow resent her more for not complaining. "You don't talk much," he'd say, not as an observation but as an accusation. "Makes people wonder." Wonder. She mopped the floors and emptied the sharps containers and restocked the linen carts. And she learned the building the way she'd once learned terrain, which entrances jammed, Mauger spoke, which stairwells had bad doors, where the oxygen lines ran and where the shutoffs were, which fire extinguishers were past inspection date, because she'd quietly checked all of them in her first 2 weeks out of a habit she couldn't break. Nobody asked her to. Nobody noticed. Spied. She wrote the expired ones on a list and slid the list under the facilities manager's door, and never heard a word back. And 3 of those extinguishers were still hanging. Expired on the wall the afternoon the east stairwell caught fire. In fear spoke she. She thought about that list as the smoke came in. She thought about it the way you think about a thing you already knew was going to matter. The fire had started in an electrical room on the 2nd floor. Later they'd say it was a transformer, an old one, the kind a budget committee keeps voting to replace next year. And it had climbed into the ceiling space and found the east stairwell, which ran like a chimney straight up 4 floors. Minister spoke. The alarm was going now. Finally, a flat mechanical bleat, and the overhead voice was telling everyone to proceed calmly to the nearest exit. And the problem with the nearest exit was that For the entire east half of the building, the nearest exit was full of fire. And already moving. The Della, a young nurse by the arm in the corridor outside the cafeteria. A kid, 24 maybe, named on her badge as Priya Anand, eyes already wide and wet. The east stairs are gone, Della said. Her voice was low and even, and it cut through the alarm somehow. Don't send anyone that way. Who's the charge nurse on 3? Women? What? Who are you? There's a comment housekeeping. Who's the charge nurse on 3? Go? But. Find her. Tell her the west stairwell is clear, but it won't be for long. Tell her to move ambulatory patients first, fast, before the smoke pulls that way. Go. And the kid went, because there are moments when the body simply obeys the calmest voice in the room and asks questions later. On the 3rd floor, the situation was the kind that turns into a headline. 26 patients. 4 of them in the ICU step-down unit, intubated, on monitors, not the sort of people you could just walk down a stairwell. A charge nurse named Sandra Mercado trying to hold a unit together with a skeleton afternoon crew. And the attending who'd happened to be on the floor was Dr. Aaron Pruitt, 38, good in a clinic and frozen solid right now, standing in the middle of the nurse's station, saying the same 3 words over and over. Where's the protocol? Where's the protocol? As if a binder were going to walk him out of this. Yunan. Della came up the west stairwell against the flow, which is the thing nobody trains you to do, and the thing that makes everyone stop on and stare, a person moving toward the danger when everyone else is moving away. She had a wet towel around her neck and another in her hand, and she'd grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall on 2. One of the good ones. She'd checked, and she came onto the floor and took it in the way she used to take in a compound, in one sweep, threat and exit and asset and liability. Up the east shaft, she said to Sandra Mercado. You've got maybe 12 minutes before this floor is not breathable. The vent system's pulling it toward the south rooms, so start there. Anyone who can walk, walk them now, west stairwell, single file, hand on the shoulder of the person ahead. Your sickest 4, where are they? To her enormous credit, did not waste time asking who this woman was. She'd been a nurse for 20 years, and she knew competence the way you know your own name. Bays 1 through 4, the intubated patients. We can't carry vents down 4 flights. I butted. Then we don't take the stairs with them. Is the freight elevator on emergency power? Elevators lock out in a fire. The elevator in the east wing locks out. The freight lift in central plant doesn't. It's on the generator loop. It's a separate system. I've seen the panel. Della was already moving toward the step-down bays. I need 2 strong people and your respiratory therapist. Now. Dr. Pruitt found his voice. You can't move ventilated patients on a freight elevator. That's not. Who authorized? What's your name? Adzakidil's spook. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. There was no contempt in it, which somehow made it worse. My name's Okonkwo. I clean the floors. In about 9 minutes, everyone in those 4 beds is going to suffocate while you look for a binder. You can write me up after. And she turned her back on him and got to work. And the terrible clarity of what she'd said hung in the air long enough that even Pruitt started moving. Commander the rifle spoke. What happened over the next 20 minutes, the people who were there would describe for years afterward. And they'd never describe it quite the same way twice, because it had the quality that real emergencies have of arriving in fragments. But certain things they all agreed on. They agreed that the housekeeper had organized the evacuation of an entire patient floor in less time than it took the fire department to get up the road, and that she'd done it with a kind of economy that didn't feel rushed, even though everything was on fire. They agreed. She'd known things she had no business knowing, that she'd reached the central plant freight lift, and known its access code was the building's year of construction, because that's how lazy facilities men always set them, and she'd been right. Hemfied. They agreed she'd improvised a way to keep the ventilated patients breathing during transport, bagging them by hand in relay, teaching a panicking nursing assistant to squeeze the bag in rhythm with a calm, steady count. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. The way you'd teach a child to swim, until the kid's hands stopped shaking and found the rhythm on their own. And they agreed about the last patient. And his name. His name was Walter Brody, 81, intubated. In the room nearest the east wall, and the smoke had gotten into his room first and thickest. By the time they cleared the first 3, amended. Walter's monitor was screaming, and the air in his room was the color of dishwater. And Dr. Pruitt said, from the doorway, the thing that everyone there would remember him saying. He said, "We have to leave him. The room's not survivable. We can't risk the staff." And maybe he was even right by the book. Novin. The book is written by people who've never been in the room. Come in. Della went in anyway. Come on. She went in low, towel over her face, and she got to Walter Brody. And she did the thing that you cannot teach in a binder, which is the thing where you decide that this person's life is worth the next 90 seconds of your own. Of him's Dwonkike. She disconnected him from the wall and bagged him by hand, and she got the brake off his bed with her foot, and she drove that bed out of that room. Through smoke she couldn't see 2 feet into. My memory of a floor plan she'd cleaned every night for 7 months, and she came out the other side, coughing blood, tinged, spit onto the linoleum with Walter Brody still alive. On the gurney, and that was the moment. The people who were there said, "A moment." Everyone understood they had been wrong about her, in a way that went all the way down to the foundation. The fire department reached the 3rd floor 4 minutes later. It was already empty. Standing against the wall in the west stairwell when the firefighters came up, oxygen mask on her own face, now because a paramedic had insisted, and one of the firefighters. A captain, helmet pushed back and a soot on his face, stopped in front of her and stood very still. He looked at the way she was sitting, the particular way. Back to the wall, knees up, eyes still scanning even now, counting exits she no longer needed to count. Noski, where'd you learn to clear a floor like that? He asked. At him. This exhausted woman in a gray housekeeping polo, and for the first time in 7 months, something in her face opened a fraction of an inch. Same place you did, she said. Different country. Woman, her name was not Della Okonkwo, or it was, but it hadn't always been the whole of it. Before Cedar Hollow, before the mop and the morgue floor, and Roy Tibbets's small kingdom, women spoke. There had been a desert and a series of forward aid stations, and a call sign that a battalion of men had spoken with the particular reverence you reserve for the person who decided your life was worth 90 seconds of their own, and over, for 9 years. A medic. She'd been a combat medic, and then a senior medic, and then the person they flew in when the situation was past saving, and somehow she made it not past saving anyway. They'd called her Stitch, because of a thing she'd said early on, about how everything tears and most things can be sewn back if you're fast, and you don't panic, and the name had stuck the way the true ones do. She'd left all of it. Not because of one thing. It was never one thing, but because there'd been a convoy and a decision that wasn't hers to make made by someone above her. And good people had died in a way that the after-action report sanded smooth into acceptable language, and she'd come home and found she couldn't be in rooms with that language anymore. She'd put 9 years in a folder marked Facilities, Contract, and gone looking for the smallest possible life, a life where nobody asked her to be exceptional, where being invisible was a mercy rather than an insult, and she'd nearly found it too. 7 good gray months of finding it. Amir ended that. You can't go back to invisible, after you've carried a man through smoke in front of 40 witnesses. Aftermath was the strange part. She'd expected, in the small, mean way you expect things when you've been treated small for a while, to be questioned. To have someone in administration suggest she'd overstepped, exceeded her role, created liability. And there was a version of that. Dr. in an incident report that used the phrase, an unlicensed staff member assumed clinical responsibilities, and for about 36 hours that report was the official story. The way administrators' reports always become the official story, while the actual record stays in a drawer. Della was a small town, and Sandra Mercado was not a small person. Even an Oster spoke, and she walked into the chief nursing officer's office the morning after the fire, and put her own 20-year reputation on the table, and said that if a housekeeper hadn't ignored a doctor and a binder, and rifle spoke, this hospital would be planning 4 funerals and a press conference, and that she would say exactly that to any reporter, board member, or attorney who wanted to hear it. And Walter Brody's daughter, who turned out to be a county judge, had some things to say as well. And Priya Anand, the young nurse from the corridor, told the story to everyone who'd listen, and it traveled the way the true ones do. The recommendation, when it came from 2 directions at once, which is its own kind of strange. The hospital gave her a plaque she didn't ask for, and a job she actually wanted. They offered to sponsor her nursing recertification, because it turned out her field credentials had been most of the way to an RN the whole time, buried in the folder with everything else. Night. And a letter arrived from a man whose name she recognized, a name several pay grades above anyone she'd served under directly, because Walter Brody's son-in-law had made a phone call to a friend, who'd made a phone call. And somewhere a person whose job it was to know these things had matched a housekeeper in Ohio to a call sign in a desert. And the letter said, a soldier spoke, in the dry, careful language of those letters, that her actions reflected the highest traditions of the service. Of Nolger spoke, and that some people apparently never stopped being who they were, no matter what badge they put on. Bits didn't apologize. Men like Roy never quite managed the words. But she noticed he stopped handing her the morgue floor, and one morning she found that someone had finally replaced the 3 expired fire extinguishers on the 2nd floor, and a 4th one besides, and she knew, without being told, that he'd done it himself, late in it, when no one was watching, which was as close to an apology as Roy Tibbets had in him, and she decided to accept it as one. The thing she hadn't expected was how much she'd resist the recertification. Sandra Mercado pushed and the hospital paid, and Pat from HR cried actual tears about it. And still Della sat with the application for 3 weeks before she could make herself sign it. Because signing it meant the end of small. It meant being seen. Mulger spoke. It meant standing in a trauma bay again with people's worst moments in her hands, and she'd spent 7 months and 9 years before that learning that the worst moments lived in her hands whether she wanted them to or not, and that maybe the running from it had become a different kind of cage, neat and private, and entirely her own. About it, eventually with a counselor the hospital connected her to, a woman named Hattie Voorhees who had a quiet office and asked sideways questions. I made myself small to be safe, Della told her once. And I think it worked. And I think it was killing me a little. Both at the same time. It can be true, Hattie said. You don't have to pick. I traded one cage for another. Drawn. Or, Hattie said, you put yourself somewhere you could heal, and now you've healed enough to leave. Those look the same from the inside for a while. About the wet towel and the count in 2-3, out 2-3, the rhythm her hands had remembered before her mind caught up. She thought about how the running had felt, those first months like peace. Monson died, and how lately it had started to feel like holding her breath. I don't want to be Stitch again, she said. That person was load-bearing for too many people for too long. I don't have it in me to be load-bearing like that anymore. Don't be Stitch, Hattie said. Be whoever you are now. The skills don't belong to the call sign. They belong to you. You can use them in a smaller way. A Tuesday way. A Tuesday way. She liked that. The application on a Thursday. She kept running the trails out past the reservoir in the mornings, not as therapy, just because she liked the way the cold came off the water before the sun got high. She kept Roy Tibbets's wordless apology in the form of 4 new fire extinguishers, and she stopped flinching when people learned her first name. She let them learn it. Della. It was just a name, always been just a name. Attached to a person who'd done some hard things and could do some more, if they needed doing, and who was, more days than not now. All right. Recertified. Months later, recertified, in scrubs that felt strange, and then didn't, she stood at a station on a quiet floor of Meridian General and picked up a chart. 63-year-old woman, chest pain, frightened, embarrassed, trying to talk herself out of being there the way people do. Nurse Okonkwo read the chart, in the 10 steps it took to reach the bed, and she pushed the curtain aside, and she looked at the frightened woman with the full attention of a person who had nowhere else to be and nothing left to prove, and she pulled up a chair so she'd be at eye level, and she said the only words that had ever mattered, in a desert or a stairwell or a quiet room on a Tuesday afternoon. Mine. Tell me when it started. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. And then she listened, and she listened. A lot about the list. Della slid under that facility's door, her second week, the one nobody answered. 3 fire extinguishers, expired, hanging on a wall, like a sentence waiting to be read. She wrote them down because writing them down was right, even when no one was watching and no one would thank her. That's the part people miss when they hear this story. They want the helicopters of it, the smoke and the carry and the firefighter asking where she learned to clear a floor. But the whole ending was already written in that quiet, unglamorous moment when she did the right thing into a void. Cause and effect doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes the cause is a woman doing her job honestly for 7 months, and the effect is 4 people going home to their families. But I keep turning over. Della wasn't extraordinary because she'd been Stitch. Plenty of people carry impressive pasts into small rooms and never once reach for them when it counts. What made her who she was lived in 3 things, and they were ordinary things, available to anybody. The first was that she refused to let being treated small make her act small. In arrangement. Roy Tibbets handed her the morgue floor to grind her down, and she took it without ever letting it rot into bitterness, and that steadiness of character was the soil everything else grew in, was that she actually knew things. She'd walked the building, checked the panels, learned the freight lift code, mapped the shutoffs. Not because anyone asked, but because a clear and abide. Prepared mind is its own kind of mercy in a crisis. When the smoke came, she didn't have to be brave first. An older spoke. She got to be brave because she'd already done the thinking. And the third was the hardest, the one that nearly didn't survive. After the fire, after the praise, she sat with that recertification application for 3 weeks and almost couldn't sign it. Going back meant being seen, and being seen meant carrying weight again. The toughness it took to run toward Walter Brody's room was real. Toughness was choosing not to hide afterward, deciding that healing isn't the same as disappearing. And a soldier spoke. Hattie called it a Tuesday way of using your gifts, and that phrase has stayed with me. You don't have to be load-bearing for a battalion. You just have to stop standing behind the supply cart. So when I think about my own quiet seasons, the ones where I'm tempted to make myself small enough to never be asked for anything, Della, pulling up a chair to be at eye level with a frightened woman and saying she wasn't going anywhere. The fire didn't make her. It only revealed what 7 honest, prepared months, unbroken months had already built. We get to build that too, on the ordinary days, before anyone screams our name.